Welcome back to Behind the Checkout. I'm John Lunn, founder and CEO of Gr4vy, and your host of today's episode, Who Really Owns the Checkout? The Battle for the Last Click. Today's episode is all about control. As brands, platforms, and payment providers compete for that final critical interaction, the last click, we're hearing new strategies, new tensions, and some very real implications for revenue and user experience. To help us break it all down, I'm joined by Marko Medenica, an expert in global payments and fintech strategy. Marko has held leadership roles at Google and most recently at Grammarly. Marko, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, John.
So let's kick it off. Big question. Who should own the checkout? And how has that answer changed over the last decade?
The key question. Okay, so I'd love to take maybe 30 seconds to level set on what I mean by checkout, at least when sharing this opinion. I've seen that it varies among companies, especially between companies, but even within companies, you'll find folks think of different things when they think of the checkout experience. So if you think of what a journey of checking out, say from a simple item sale, what the merchant looks like, that merchant needs to decide, what am I selling? Like what item would bundle to whom? Is it only to new users? Is it to existing users? With what pricing model? Is this a subscription? Is this one time? Is this usage? At what price point? Is it discounted? What currency it's in, etc. This tends to be within checkout flows, but I tend to think of this as billing or commerce tools rather than a payment. Once you know what you're selling to whom, this point, that's where payments get hit. And so that's where I think of, hey, what payment methods are we offering? How are we storing the data associated with those payment methods? How are we updating it? How do we process that actual payment collection or payment disbursement? And that's what I tend to refer to as checkout, at least for the purpose of this conversation. Okay. Would you generally agree with that, John?
No, I think so. I think the differentiator is like going back 10 years or so, you had the shopping cart, and there were shopping cart companies out there that you essentially threw stuff over and they dealt with the entire shopping checkout and shopping cart experience. I think checkout for me now is the last bit. Basically, you do the payment, not the rest of it.
Great. So we're on the same page. So to answer your question then, I believe that ideally the merchant should have the control of that process, because it is a sensitive experience and a purchaser's journey. It's a contract essentially that you're entering, and therefore it is a part of your offering to your clients. However, I would say that I found that it probably depends on whether the payments offering is the heart of your offering. So if you're just selling widget, how critical is that to the value that you add to the world? That's one differentiator. And the second differentiator, I think, is just sheer size. Because the difference financial anyway that you can make at the checkout juncture is corresponding to your size. And so I would say that ideally as a merchant, you'd want to own it, but perhaps early on, especially if payments is not the heart of your offering, it might be fine to outsource it. It's almost like a build versus buy decision at this point. As long as you're aware of the cost of potential tech debt that you're kicking down the road if tomorrow you should want to own it. And there are a lot of situations where it makes sense for the merchant to just not have to think about this until it makes sense. Whether this changed over the years, I think it definitely has. And it doesn't have to do with AI. For one, because of folks like you. I think a small merchant has always had the opportunity to outsource payments, but at a great cost of walking oneself into a corner strategically. So back in the day, you'd essentially give everything that we just defined, your commerce tools and payments, to a provider, and they would own your customer data. A lot of these contracts were exclusive. I've negotiated out of a few exclusive contracts myself recently. So that used to be the reality that was hard to avoid. Today, I've seen businesses in the billions that are run with one or two folks that know what they're doing, essentially orchestrating a number of providers in orchestration and vaulting, in processing, in data management, in chargeback management. They essentially outsource everything and maintain strategic freedom down the road. And so in today's world, then I would argue if payments is not a heart of your small, that approach makes a lot more sense. And then as you grow, or if you're a marketplace or something where payments is truly core to what you do, then strongly consider what it would take to.
I think there's definitely a user experience side to this as well. Like there's nothing worse than to put you off shopping, that you get the checkout page and you get like 3 fields in some font from 1972 with some page, and it just looks like someone hacked it together, and you instantly, your reaction is, oh my God, do I really want to put my credit card into that thing? So I think it's definitely, as you're smaller, your consumers being used to, say, the Shopify checkout or the checkouts they've seen 100 times definitely helps them move through the process. Whereas if you hack it together yourself, it can put people off and make people nervous.
Oh, that's a very good point. I thought where you were heading is that due to the experience, you want to own it, but it's actually the other way around.
Well, yeah, especially if you're small and you do it badly. I think as you get bigger and you get sort of designers and all the rest of it, you can make people more comfortable with it. But definitely, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm a payments geek. If I get to an unusual checkout page, it's almost a warning to me in my head. And what's going on here? But it's interesting. I mean, originally it was all the power was with the carts, and then it kind of shifted towards the PSPs, right? So these hosted payment pages became the thing to use, and they even now, I would say, a number of the sort of more SMB mid-size payment processors still push you towards a hosted payment page. But is that shifting? Is that starting to shift away from that even more?
Honestly, I don't know. I think we've kind of gone back and forth. I think as APIs and developers got better, we shifted away from hosted pages for a while there for a few years. And then that came also with popularity of the growth team. And then people could experiment with buttons and stuff. I think more recently, the pendulum's kind of swamped back to more hosted page as sort of global offerings come out and folks have started offering things like, hey, we'll actually show you the payment methods that make sense for that geo for that customer. Or they already have it stored with us, therefore might as well use that. It'll be better UX. So I think we've gone back and forth, and I think we're now in that move back to a hosted page. That's my feeling, at least. What do you think?
I think, look, there's an incentive question, right? I think absolutely. I think we're starting to get to a bit of a hybrid, actually. So we're starting to get to a point where things like credit card fields and all of that can be, hosted fields, because credit card fields a field. But if you want to deal with, 10 buy now, pay later providers, right? You don't want to be building all of that UI, UX yourself. It's too much. So I think it really, again, back to what you said earlier, it depends what you're selling and where you're selling it. But I think as you get more international, there's some parts of it you really don't want to build. Like, I think you look at something like Klarna, which is fantastic, but there's 8 different Klarnas. And what Klarna you present to that customer, if you build it from scratch, it's going to take you a long time. So you should host something like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But what are the risks? What are the risks here of not hosting it yourself?
I think this goes back to that similar build versus buy evaluation. When I think of those, I always like to think of, hey, what makes sense now, plus a few scenarios where I end up as a business. And so if you do not host your own experience, you not only not host the UX and the journey that your user is going through, but you also don't have any optionality at that point. So say you are with a PSP who offers this on a play tree that's really easy. What happens tomorrow if that PSP gets acquired and decides not to work with you? Or maybe you have a fraud spike or something and they want to offload you. And now you're in kind of a scramble mode, right? You really kind of put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's definitely one risk, is that failover, so to speak, but not of a technical kind, more of a strategic kind. Um, Other risks with not having multiple auctions are clearly cost, clearly auth rates in the card world, and then also ability to expand. Right? If your provider is not heading to the country where you're heading to, now what are you doing? Now you're gonna actually orchestrate just for one country on your end, that provider, and then another one just for a country. You're actually kind of bringing complexity back to you. And so I do think it helps to have an idea of not just what you need now, but what you're likely to need a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. But it is that sort of buy versus build decision. Is that
And I think, next question is really like, how hard is it to move away from it, right? How hard it is if you're using a hosted checkout page and now you want to bring it in-house, how difficult it is to do that? I mean, there's security implications, there's auditing implications, there's a lot, but how difficult is it actually to do it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's not easy. I think you've been in payments forever, and one of the typical things that happens with folks that enter the field, they go and they're like, oh wow, this could be done a lot more elegantly, and then they dive in, and then the complexity just blows up. And uh, it is because some of these are very old systems. They're also regulated. Um, they're also tax applicable. None of these things were built to be elegant, and so bringing something in house is hard. It is hard. To your earlier question, it has become easier because I think you can now choose piecemeal what to bring in house, what not to bring in house. So, for example, you could, instead of bringing card vaulting in house and having to deal with compliance, vault with someone like you, um, and so use a vendor for that, but use hosted fields and fully control the experience, and then orchestrate to however many PSPs are required as you'd like. So you could take only a piece of it, but not others. And so again, it really helps if you know why you're doing it. Like what is the goal you're trying to achieve? Is it ultimate control over UX? Is it negotiating power for pricing? Is it ability to scale very fast? What is the actual underlying reason? And then you could pick a piece, being what makes sense to bring in house and make your job easier. If you're bringing everything in house, I that is very hard. And there's a reason why really only a few merchants, and really the mega merchants, do most of this in house. Everybody else outsources at least part of it.
I guess then let's rear the ugly head of PCI, right? The minute you start, touching payment information yourself, and you open the door to PCI. And there are different levels of PCI, as we know, but I don't know. Maybe what's your experience around that? Like, do people understand it? Is there? You have the engineers like, we should do this in house because we can control it, but then you have the regulatory side of like, oh my god, what is this? What does this mean to us as a business?
Yeah, listen, nothing that's regulated is easy or elegant, and so depending on the level of PCI compliance, it can get quite involved. And so that you usually now break out outside of your payments team. You need to involve your CISO and your compliance folks that manage a bunch of other compliance frameworks too. I've found that for all but the largest merchants, and for all but the companies that where payments are the heart of their offering, it makes sense to try to stay away from it and ingest only what you need. For example, you could ingest only up to, well, it used to be 6, now 8 or 9 digits of PIN, so that you could potentially make some intelligent decisions of where you route what, or be able to analyze your data accordingly by bank, by card type, by whatever makes sense in your business. And that still requires a level of PCI compliance but is quite light compared to actually vaulting yourself. So I go back to that same framework. Unless this is what you do, why get into it? Why distract yourself from your core product?
Exactly. You've worked inside some very big platforms. What do most people underestimate about that last click, like owning it? What is the one thing people forget about until it kicks them in the face?
I think I would highlight three things. Um, One is change over time. This is not a stagnant field. The world is not stagnant. Two is global differences. A lot of businesses today are global. And third would be the sheer amount of data that you need to make interesting decisions that are actually of material value to you. And so, for example, if you take over control of the entire thing, you might know what the optimum setup is today for something, but that might not be true 6 months from now, or even 3 months from now in some cases. And so if you stack these decisions that you might be making, some are maybe UX decisions, how you present something, some might be regulatory decisions, some might be routing decisions, maybe either for cost or conversion rates, that just might not hold true 6 months from now. And so unless you plan to just keep an eye on all the decisions that you've made forever, at any one point, you might be actually underperforming your potential. Global differences, the world, especially when it comes to payments, which is an emotional, cultural thing, differences are huge. And so if you were to go country by country, you'll find not only that the banking stack differs, the regulations differ, but just how people think about a transaction differs. And that's just a monumental amount of work. And that too, that changes over time, right? We've seen India and Brazil change overnight the last few years, for example. And then the last is the amount of data. So if you think, hey, I want to really own all this data so that I can really choose what do I show to whom, where do I route this type of transaction, that type of transaction. For a merchant to do this at any sort of meaningful granularity, very, very few merchants will have enough data to do this. And then by definition, therefore, it makes sense to have somebody else in the middle who can collect data across a large number of sellers to do something interesting with it. So I think those three things are the first that come to mind.
Yeah. Really, I mean, the data thing is important here because, like, it is checkout ownership actually really about who owns the data, right? And who can do what with the data. Because I think there's lots of companies out there that are promising very high auth rates and and charging for it, frankly, because they have all of the data and they can do it, but that wasn't their data to start with. So there is an interesting thing here. If you want to own your data 100%, in most cases, merchants won't have enough. But if you are using someone else for it, then what are the rules? Who gets to use it for what? And whose data is it? So how does that pan out in the end?
Think of it very specifically. So is my concern that someone will take away my data? So is my concern that somebody else owns my customers? That's one thing, and that would be a serious thing. But I think today with proper contracting, that should not be a concern. You should always be able to own your customer. The other side of the data question is that somebody else get access to my data as well. And that's a bit of a different question, right? By definition, your vendors will, but what else can they use it for, as you pointed out? Do I need to give my users the control to opt in or out of that? Does that make my life more difficult? Does that make my offering more confusing? Or do I expose myself, like, especially in a world where if you're not working with multiple parties, if you're funneling most of your business through a single party and say you're private, now you're actually exposing your financials in a way to a third party, right? And so that second question, I think it's a little bit more interesting one to figure out for the business and what might not work for you. I think what I've seen, at least, is that for smaller businesses, the benefit of getting access to intelligence of a pool of merchants tends to outweigh these risks that I just mentioned for somebody having insight into or also having access to your data. And a lot of those risks could be mitigated as well.
I mean, is this conversation we're having about who owns the checkout actually pointless, because the world is changing, right? We've got rising of even more wallets now. We've got, the invisible payments, one click, Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, Fastlane, et cetera, and they kind of just replace the checkout, and they're fighting to become pre-checkout, right? When you get to that checkout page, if you happen to be a Shopify user, maybe Shop Pay just pops up instantly, or Fastlane would love to take over from PayPal, or maybe MasterCard one click would like to take out. Does the checkout just go away? And if it goes away, what the hell happens to consumer, and more importantly, in this case, merchant choice at that stage?
Yeah. So the same page. I'm seeing all those trends unfold as well. I think as everything, it depends again, right? The best non-answer. There are benefits to these platforms for merchants, right? The benefits are, like we said, hey, if you're small, maybe the familiarity of that UX will actually encourage a purchase. Maybe because the user already has an account with said platform, it'll go faster and I'll lose fewer merchants. Maybe my time to market will be a lot shorter because I don't have to build this. So there are benefits to it. And then there are costs, which is, hey, now I'm shipping my user somewhere else. I actually don't know what they're going through, and I especially won't be able to keep track on what they're going through over time. And I'm sharing my data and my business now with that.
And potentially, a lot of them are moving towards basically marketing. I don't know if you've opened the PayPal app recently, but it looks like a marketplace now. So, are they using that data to lure away your customers?
Yeah. So there are real costs to it.
Yeah.
And so I think a very intentional decision of, will I support those is in order, depending on where you are. Maybe if you're just starting off and you're just scared to get to market and as quickly as you can, and you don't have massive volumes and payments are not in any sort of way the heart of your offering, maybe go for it with a plan to reconsider once you're at point A, B, or C in the future. But there are definitely more and more. Everybody's fighting for eyeballs and attention, and so they are indeed part of the play is to take your users' attention and monetize it in some sort of way.
Look, anyway, AI is going to be doing all our shopping for us soon anyway, right? So,
Same set of challenges, just somebody else is doing it.
So if you were advising an ambitious startup today, would you tell them to build their own checkout? I think you've already answered this, but would you tell them to start by building their own checkout, or should they start with someone else and move later? What would you advise?
Yeah. I mentioned it a couple of times now already. So maybe to reiterate more articulately, as a recipe that I would follow. If I'm brand new, my goal would be, and this is not the core of what I'm building, my goal would be to get it off my mind and free me up for my core work without walking myself into a corner strategic. I think that's a key piece, and that's possible these days. And so perhaps, I'm honestly not selling your product, but truly, you could pretty easily orchestrate your processing and outsource your vaulting. There are other companies that'll allow you to get access to your data in pretty amazing ways. If you want to dig into payments tomorrow for some reason, there are companies that'll let you deal with fraud. There are companies that will let you deal with checkout operations and handling all that. To the extent that you can get all this off your mind, if it's not the core to what you do, without tomorrow making it difficult to get out of it, which is why I mentioned orchestration. I would recommend that. Set it up so that you can focus on your core thing. And then if tomorrow you decide to start offering financial services, maybe you're a vertical platform, you want to offer embedded services. That now becomes core of the offering. Now you need to think about like how much of this control do I need to take back? Or you get massive, and now percentage points or even bips really matter. Maybe you want to work improving your auth rate, but actually strategically picking who you send your traffic, or you want to work on your cost, or you want to work on fast expansion, or whatever the case might be. And then you look at the world with that lens on. Yeah. So the two key differentiators to repeat for me are: is this what you do? Is this the core of your offering? And how large are you? Like, does this matter? Does optimizing this at the margin matter for your size?
We always like to end this podcast by asking you, next 5 years, what will we still have checkouts? What's it going to look like? Predict the future, please.
Boy, my instinct is, and I have not done research. I have zero to support this with, is that we will have a dual world still, with a number of folks wanting to shop in, call it traditional way, which is today, your e-commerce, because they want to, because they like to. The same way retail didn't go away. Some folks like to walk in. And so I don't think that'll disappear. I don't think people will want to lose ability to just do things themselves. But clearly there's been a rise in agentic commerce. And I do think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of use cases. And so as it happens in payments, we're not taking anything away. We're just adding complexity. And yeah, we have to handle in-person retail, online agents. We're going to have to handle all of it. I don't think the traditional quote unquote model is going to go away within the next 5 years, just because we're humans. Some of us like doing it for certain things.
I don't know if anyone enjoys paying, but we'll see. But I really appreciate your time today, Marko. Thanks for all your great insights. And if there are any questions for anyone, we're definitely looking forward to Marko in the future. But thank you for listening to the podcast today, and thank you, Marko, for being on.
Thanks for having me, John.